Good evening, everyone. I can't even get the first words out of my mouth. Welcome to the 9th episode of Binge Live. And tonight, it's just my fellow host, Chris Faraone, and myself, just talking about 10 years of binge. But, of course, we have to lead with the most important story, which is that the Globe covered an alligator on the Charles River.
It was not normal.
No, it's not. You can tell because it says that. And I'm pretty sure that the alligator is named Epstein, but I can't be. Let's scroll down and see. Let's see. That's not the name of the alligator. What's shocking about the story is that they don't quote the alligator. I thought they would, but they definitely did not. They just said, he was hard not to notice, said Whitney Lieberman, 28 of East Boston, who saw the alligator while running to work in one of the lagoons. Apparently we have lagoons on the Charles River. So very, very exciting piece.
If you look at the most viewed stories, it's not even registered. If you're going to do clickbait, man, if you're going to do alligator clickbait, nobody gives a shit. So
enough of the alligator for this evening. I wish we could do such hard-hitting reporting, Chris. I don't know what we've been doing for 10 years. We haven't had nearly enough alligator stories. But
you never know. Maybe they're making wallets out of this thing. I don't know, man.
Perhaps.
We should definitely open with a Globe story of the week every week. Of course, if you're not behind the paywall already, don't go for the alligators. We'll share a gift copy with you.
Yeah, exactly. So we could do that kind of stuff ourselves, and we do some fun reporting, but I don't know if the world needed to know that a couple people thought they saw an alligator.
No, I mean,
just saying, it doesn't seem like a very important story, considering all the other things that could be
in 10 years. We've done some alligator level stories, but we've done a lot of other stuff too.
On April Fools, we certainly have, and we usually pretend they're Globe stories. So yeah, but all right. I mean, so we've been doing Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, and by the way, I'm Jason Pramas of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, and Chris, yep, also of BINJ. And yes, we launched BINJ. I mean, we'll go over the Genesis, the public version of the Genesis story. Chris will go over it pretty much now, but basically, like, when John Loftus and myself and Chris were all on board, was a meeting we had on June 30th of 2015. But Chris was working on it before that. But since then, it's been over 10 years. And
what was the date? What was the date?
June 30th, 2015.
All right. And then also, because there's always different ways you can mark these things, right? And our first feature, which I've dug up, is Dedham and Goliath by Nick Moorhead. Props to Nick Moorhead. And that was published on July 25th, 2015. So I'm sure maybe we had worked, and we could talk, briefly, even before we get to the Genesis. That was the first story. It was about big energy. It was an environmental story about a suburban fight against a pipeline. I know as editorial director, I chose this story for a few reasons. I wanted to show the kind of story we were interested in. And it was something that was just happening right out in the open, a big protest against this pipeline in places like West Roxbury, right in the city of Boston. And back to our friends at the Globe just wasn't covering it, right? It was, and back then they certainly had a lot more resources. Couldn't just be let off the hook the way they are now. Like, not everyone can cover everything. But that's definitely part of the Genesis story, because a lot of these stories that I look at that I wanted to do, they were just not going to get done without some kind of support system, without a nonprofit, whatever the hell it was, some kind of engine. But actually, why don't we back up though? So people, why don't you just explain what Open Media Boston was, and just kind of what you were doing also.
We could do it that way. I mean, I thought you might start with February of 2015, the Picantico meeting, that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, in that, it's like, well, that, okay. So I was, right, even before Picantico, I found out that, some of the people know I used to be a writer for the Dig Boston, and the Boston Phoenix before that. And those papers are members of a trade association called the Association of Alternative News Media. back then, the alternative Association of Alternative News Weeklies.
News
And
weeklies, yeah.
we have been involved in that association for years, and this is like, so 11 years ago I went to the conference, and the conference was held with something at the time called the Media Consortium. And the Media
Right.
Consortium, you might not remember the actual Media Consortium, but you would, I'm sure a lot of our readers know, are its members. At the top of that food chain, The Nation, Mother Jones, Democracy Now!, Laura Flanders Show. And then also a lot of single issue outlets, one Chalkbeat covering education,
Yep.
and just several outlets that you people know in various capacities, environmentally focused outlets. And I had also, actually, this was after the Phoenix closed, I'd been writing for I think not the New Republic, American Prospect. And long story short, I knew that these nonprofits existed, that was a thing. But then there I was at this conference with the alt weeklies like that I knew, and all of these outlets like The Nation. And long story short, I found out, oh, they have nonprofits that pay for this heavy reporting, and they raise money to do this years-long investigations and stuff like that. I said, why can't we do this in Boston at a smaller level? I was with the Dig at the time. I was the editor,
Yeah.
so I wanted money to do investigative reporting. I came back and I said, what is this? And I always say, back then, my idea of nonprofit journalism was basically what, NPR, PBS. I knew of one strange operation, Jason, and that was yours. I'd interviewed you for a Phoenix article for a protest-related demonstration that you'd done near the State House, but also,
in
been in
2010. Yeah.
been in your office several times because you were, your project shared an office with a lot of Occupy activists that were doing things to Occupy Boston, and of course you and Sarah Betancourt with you, props to Sarah, were providing some of the best coverage. So but where did you find out about nonprofit journalism, or like what was that? Now I have to. This one,
I mean, I kind of evolved. I come out of the nonprofit sector like since I was young. So when I was always doing some kind of media, certainly, and a lot of years I was doing different kinds of news media or magazines or whatever, zines, for those of you that have heard of these things. I just noticed somebody's like some I think it's kind of I don't know, I don't want to be insulting, but I do see people periodically saying that they're starting a zine or that they have a zine now, and to me that's very much for like 30 to 40 years too late. That was kind of a medium of a certain time and place, and it basically, like, zines effectively were superseded by the internet. Like once the internet became a thing by the mid 90s that regular people could access, and I was one of the people that was able to access it earlier than that, like in the 80s, because of hanging around, MIT and places like that. But once everybody could get on to this new thing and use this new, other thing called the web, and like have web browsers and, look at different websites, which all of it was new, and different publications, especially smaller ones, were trying out web pages. The larger news media was a little bit slower to start trying to use the tech. So it was the Wild West, and people that were starting different kinds of publications on the early web, it was very much the same people that were doing zines, to my mind. And I was at so I had publications back then, and I would kind of go back and forth to my point between being a political activist on the American left, and then left of the Democrats, right? Like, at different times I was a green, I generally call myself a socialist. I've also called myself an anarchist at times. Now I kind of, sometimes I'll say socialist, sometimes I'll say I'm on the libertarian left or whatever. But without putting too fine a point on it, I'm a big fan of democracy, right? And kind of small d democracy, like we should have more democracy in our society, be it in politics, be it in economics. People should share more and be nice to each other and all this. And that's not the society we have. So I certainly, from a young age, from like the time I was 15 even, I was doing different kinds of like political activist stuff, ranging from Greenpeace, for those of you that know what that is these days. I mean, I think they're still around, but like environmental groups, that kind of stuff, anti-nuke stuff, anti-war stuff when there were wars to oppose. Unfortunately, there've been too many of those in my lifetime. And now that I'm 59 and stuff. And when I was in these different political sort of movements or proto movements, you had to have your own media, right? You want to get your positions out there. Or if you were trying to be more journalistic, as I often was, you were trying to cover what these political movements were up to. And without getting too far into the weeds with my own history, which we can do some other time or whatever I can do myself, I inevitably had already, back in, let's think about this, by 1990 through 93, when I had New Liberation News Service, which was a restart of the 60s and 70s news service, wire, they're called wires if you're in journalism, or wire services, like Associated Press. I basically restarted the concept of a left-wing wire service, news service, that was serving what you could call, community news organizations, what we call the underground press, some outlets in the alternative press, and we could talk about what all these things mean. But basically, these are very independent, sort of news organizations on the left. Their editorial lines were on the left. New Liberation News Service was a nonprofit project of the larger nonprofit that ran South End Press. For those of you who know what that was, a book publishing company, right, on the left. And they also had Z Magazine, which is still very much around.
Z
is run by a new crew. And I actually don't know, and I'm sure someone's going to probably yell at me now, but like I read their Z Network stuff like online. I don't actually know if there's still a print operation. I know that
copies of Z, and they were aligned with the Nation pretty seriously.
They were to the left of the Nation, so they're on the libertarian left to this day. I mean, that's their politics, I think. And so, I mean, I was part of that crew. New Liberation News Service was for a couple of years part of that, sort of group of nonprofits. And then, we had a falling out, as many human endeavors do, especially if they're on the political left. And so, New Liberation News Service kind of broke away from it. But whatever, it was a nonprofit. So I was doing nonprofit news as early as 1990, effectively, right? So I began to learn how one might do that. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, I was going to just say, because that's like one whole, when I discovered this was all happening and had been happening, it's kind of like everybody else. You think you invented something. Why doesn't anybody know about this? But of course, a lot of people didn't. And so there was this other. So we've talked about there's NPR and PBS. There's a lot of more radical, mostly on the left stuff going on. You're involved in that. Not a lot of money flow. There's some money flowing, but it's certainly not the same as NPR.
No,
you don't have every foundation in America. But then there's this other whole thing that really did negatively inspire BINJ for me, which was all of these kind of university-based incubators. Now it's kind of funny because I would say that that's like really kind of played out, but of course, even as recently as today, we find out about all the resources going into BU, thinking that they're saving journalism, and that's an art. We can talk about that later. But really, at the time,
and we have to be politic about that, as you know. It's one of these things. Like, it's easier for us to criticize stuff in other cities, other states, sometimes other countries, than it is to like.
I can criticize one that's not even around anymore, which was the Brandeis's. And props to Brandeis, because they had one of these first university-based incubators. But without getting into my beef with particular ones, I will say that what we saw was that we say a college or university had a journalism program, but these were barely even part of the journalism program. Sometimes they work with some students, but really it's almost like for I wouldn't say it was always for the right reasons. They'd work on one story, an elite group of reporters, often
Yeah,
from the big J schools, no matter where this university incubator was based. They'd raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions, and really produce very little journalism, a couple
right.
of pieces. Now, I understand that's the old idea. There were people in newsrooms who got paid pretty well to work on a story for 2 years. But even 10 years ago, when we were coming to do this, I didn't come for nothing. I came because the media was dying.
That's
Money
right.
was needed,
Yeah,
and we're watching these elite operations. Now, that was on the production side. Also, on the production side, they weren't working with people from the community. Now, a lot of the stuff I'll say now sounds cliche now, but it really wasn't at the time. I mean,
mm,
more maybe it was, and it just didn't feel like it to me. But I was saying, well, that's interesting. You're, a place like you not working with actual, you know, reporters, and I said, all the places I'd always worked, there was a huge advantage to working with those reporters, people on the ground, people involved with movements, activists, teachers
yeah,
writing about education, things like that. So we saw that, and then on the distribution end, these incubators, as I've called them, journalism institutes, they were distributing to places like NPR and the Boston Globe that,
right.
frankly, in my opinion, can afford to do their own reporting. So we basically, the idea was very simple. Let's raise some money, do some journalism. And at the time, I was working at the Dig as the features editor or the at-large editor, and we needed some muscle there. But also, the first thing I did, and this comes back to running into you, was really meet all of these different publishers. At the time, more than a dozen. Spanish language papers, Sampan, which published in English and Chinese, Bay
Yep,
State
still.
Banner. So we really did. What would you need if we were to have this sort of thing? So really approached it the opposite way that I saw a lot of these college outfits doing. So and then we came to you, right? Then we came to you, and next thing you know, John Loftus and I, we kind of it just happened, and we have to, of course, shout
Yeah,
out
yeah.
Press Pass TV. We
Yes.
can't write them out of history. So we had a fiscal sponsor, not to get into all the details, but we were able to get up and running quite quickly,
I mean,
thanks
so I had been
to
doing Open Media Boston that Chris mentioned earlier. That's the other, piece of it for 7.5 years at that point, right? And I'd started it from zero, and basically it was covering left-wing political activism in the Boston area, right? And that was its bailiwick. That was our beat, our main beat. But it had opinion. It had columns, it had op-eds, it had my own editorials, had my own column. So essentially we rolled. So Chris, you had heard about that, and that was the particular nonprofit. Although I'd run commercial outlets too, which we can talk about some other time, like As We Are magazine in the '90s and stuff. That was a small national, but I was most comfortable with the nonprofit form. Um, Ask me if I'm comfortable with it now, though, right? Because I mean, after we did the Dig for 7 years, which I'm skipping up here, but I don't know that I'm, especially now with the journalism industry really almost done as far as we can see compared to 10 years ago even. I don't know that I'm prepared to say, and I'm thinking about writing about this now finally, whether I would tell people that want to start a news outlet that they should go nonprofit as opposed to commercial or some hybrid or whatever. But OMB ran, for 7.5 years and then basically rolled right into BINJ. So that's where Chris is at
yeah.
now. We're at that point where Chris and John pull me in basically the day I lost my job as a professor at Lesley University of journalism, of comms, communications, sociology, that kind of stuff. Because I was one of the leaders of a union drive for core faculty at the campus, which not only didn't have a union, but didn't have tenure except for one older faculty member who was also anti-union. It didn't. She pulled it. She's one of the people that was pulling the ladder up behind her, basically. So she had a good deal. All the other faculty on campus didn't. And then there were adjuncts who had already been unionized, part-time faculty that had already been unionized, and I was part of that too. And I had become a full-time faculty, member like just the previous summer. And, I'm there like barely a year. And they got, I believe at least that they got rid of me because I was very active in the union drive.
and I want to give you a shout out. That's
You know,
another way I knew you, is because you were doing basically the first digital media conference. And how many did you end up doing up at Lesley?
Well, of the digital, we did 3 digital media conferences. I mean, I had the first electronic. Probably. Well, we should really definitely like research this. But in 1994, when I was the director of the National Writers Union in Boston, which was part of the United Auto Workers, I think still is, at the time, that was new then, that relationship. And I was director part time, starting in '92, and that's just the kind of job that I would do and do journalism. Like I could never afford to just do journalism. I was always like doing some other job, right?
Yeah.
So, and I thought we should do an electronic journalism conference, as I called it, because I was kind of hooked into, early digital circles one way or the other. And I had an office at MIT for a couple of years right before that. And I hung around, as I said, schools like that in Harvard and elsewhere. After I got kicked out of 2 schools and banned from 1 for political activism earlier than that in the 80s, primarily, and early 90s too. So I thought it was important to look at what possibilities there were for journalism from the then new technologies of like email. There's that old Globe article from like '92, I think, that says high tech underground about my news service, and the high tech was email. We were using email. That made us high tech. And then 2 years later, I do this conference, and it was actually at Lesley University. Interestingly, like then it was just called Lesley College, which is probably what it should be called now. But small colleges get heirs, and they decide they're universities at some point, whatever. And so we did it over there, and it was pretty well attended, and we had some bigger guns there. No one like super famous or anything, but we were talking about like what is this going to do to journalism? And there was some concern even then that we had, not like we have now, but I mean we were worried that it wasn't going to be just days of wine and roses or whatever for us, but we were looking to the new technologies, hopefully. And at that point, I had the small national publication I mentioned, As We Are, and we were on the web, and we were doing stuff earlier than anyone else. And the next year, I almost had to deal with AOL, but not quite, which is another funny story, which I won't tell. We almost had the deal. I was almost one of the earliest publications to be on America Online, when they went to the web.
We could bring it right, I mean, to some of our tech deals. I mean, one great, if we're going to, go through the years a little, one great BINJ story is that we started on medium.com. And if you Google for BINJ and Medium, you will find a huge war that we got into them a couple of years into operation. It was covered by a couple of different outlets, I think maybe Financial Times and the Boston Globe. And what happened was that John and I flew out to San Francisco. We met all the Medium people, went to the cool bar with them. And I'm not going to lie, I had like a smartwatch on. There's this probably the big, most moronic picture of me that you'll find in the Globe, of me like in front of the Medium logo wearing a smartwatch, Mr. Silicon Valley. And then we went on, it was actually Silicon. I always say Silicon Valley. Well, and it's actually not true because we were in San Francisco, but nevertheless, it was something else, and it was an experience. And I really liked Medium because we wanted to work with a lot of outlets. It wasn't about spending time building our own. John, our partner, now built our beautiful new site. We were a long way from that back then. But long story short, what happened was Medium, after a year or so, we had paying subscribers on there. They pulled the plug on the whole program as it was, and we were one of, I think, like 10 outlets we were the only local news outlet. It was a huge honor. It made some small media headlines, as I like to say.
But John and I were very nervous that we should not put all our eggs into that basket, and you agreed. And in other words, folks, we could have just had our only web presence be Medium, this page you're looking at here, right? And it's still sitting there, right? And it says, check out our new site. But and I think it also says that we're leaving Medium
2018. There. So we were on Medium until end of 2018. And then, and I got to say, whether through Medium and also publishing with the Dig and a lot of partners, we really, we made some heads roll at that time. We did some of our toughest reporting ever. I'm looking at some stories here, early as 2015, police and surveillance reporting, License to Connive by Kenneth Lipp. This was September 2015. So about 10 years ago, we found more than 1 million license plate numbers on a server that the city of Boston was using, stored by a private contractor, unsecured. We alerted the city. If you look up police and surveillance reporting on there, you'll find
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Our best of BINJ. Another one, Maya Schaefer and Andrew Career, SWAT Inc. This was about a lot of the things we now know about militarization of police in Massachusetts. We have a story, one of my favorite stories ever. And then there were 5. July 12th, 2016, by Adam Sennett. I cannot stress enough, folks, this story ran in more than 100 outlets across the state. It was a 2-part story about police officers injured or allegedly injured in the shootout after the marathon bombing in Watertown in April 2013. It took us a year to report this story, and it's I got to say, it's still, I'd like to think it's part of the narrative around the marathon bombing because it was significantly investigated. But that story, even though it was read by millions of people, published in the Brockton Enterprise, Quincy Patriot Ledger, some of these, when these outlets still, had followings and weren't behind hard paywalls. So that one I'm significantly proud of, and just a couple others I'll say.
If you have any links, I can put them up too, whatever.
Cool.
Just
Yeah.
let me know.
So caught with our gantries down. I'm gonna email this over to you. We're on.
No, just private chat. We got private chat here.
That's on my phone. I'm on my email.
Ah, okay. Then email it to me and I will get it.
Yeah. So this is sort of, and then I'm gonna go. So this one, I just SURV I titled it, and then because I got messed up. So another one, so caught with our gantries down. I tell people about this all the time. This is Evan Anderson, and I tell this one because I use surveillance as an example of what BINJ does differently from the Globe, from a lot of these outlets, and surveillance is one of them. We question surveillance, right? Props to Dave Tree, question authority. We question surveillance, and a lot of outlets do not, especially when that surveillance, it allows for a convenience, say a Ring door camera or gantries. So older people like us, remember, used to actually have to stop at these things called toll booths, and a long time ago put money in, and then basically Easy Pass was not so easy back in the day. And Massachusetts, when they put these new toll gantries, which take your Easy Pass as you're going down the turnpike, they told people that if you have an Easy Pass, they were not going to take a photo of your license plate and run that analysis. Guess what? That wasn't true. Huge bombshell story for us. And this is when we really showed what we are capable of doing, and show people why we need to exist, even though at the time there were a couple of outlets left. This was the kind of stuff that we were able to accomplish.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I can open some of these, but
yeah, check them out. I mean, basically, these are just those are that one though. That one right there. That's the one where we found the license plate. That one's still on Medium.
Yeah. Oops,
look at that. So
look at that. I know the pop up.
I've had people tell me, and then through the years, it has not ended. If you go, Children in SWAT Raids by Seth Kirshner, March 1st, 2018. This was one thing that always stands out to me when we went to the Worcester police and told them this way. If you go down a little bit, you'll see this one. When we went to the Worcester police and told them how many times they had gone into the wrong residence where there was a child present. Okay, so it's not like even the place where, not that I'm saying that it's okay to do a no-knock search on whoever it was and their children. No, these are places they weren't supposed to be. There were children there. When we went and told them there were children there, you know what the police told our reporter? They said basically, whatever was going on in that house, if it's in that neighborhood, whatever. Like basically denying the lives of these children. And so that one really was just mind blowing. And Seth Kirshner, really one of the best reporters we ever worked with. And that one went extremely deep. Let me give you
we both had different networks of reporters and stuff when we started, but yours was by far, stocked with the best investigative talent
Well,
we were,
I mean, it was just us. I mean, once we started doing it, people started seeing, and now we still have these reporters who are still around. Props to John Gerhardsen, who's doing stuff with us, for example. But the sad truth is that a lot of people are out of the game, right? A lot of people are either or they left the state. It's obviously easier to live in some
yeah,
other places. There's no Gary Zabel, and
he's one of
that's
my friends, right? So yeah.
great example here of a story, and man, it's almost as if every story is right on our mission. This story right here is a great example of something that everyone else thinks is just the greatest thing in the world, a robot
Yep,
dog. There are
yep,
some
yep.
people who think it's creepy, but they laugh at it. Zabel kind of takes a different approach altogether from what I recall. It's like, this thing's a joke.
That's right.
You're just
He
seeing.
still has that opinion, by the way. I mean, it's still, whenever, viewers, whenever you see, like, especially companies like they changed their name, right? But I don't think it's called Boston Dynamics
Boston
anymore. But
Dynamic, whatever. That's a government, of course, he goes into the government subsidies. I know you've written a lot about subsidies in that, in that arena.
Whenever you're seeing a robot that's supposed to be like for combat or whatever, to this day, there are still human operators that are running these things, like basically mobile platforms, which is scary enough, right? But this is basically a bunch of tech hucksters getting huge amounts of public money. And I mean, I'm glad they're not actually delivering what they're kind of at least inferring they're delivering, these death bots that will go around autonomously and like just kill whoever, basically. But and that's sort of like, for those of you that haven't read all the Dune books, the original Dune books, I don't count Brian Herbert's son's books as actually being canon. I'm one of those people. But like, one of the things about the Dune books, the great scary thing that causes all the events in the original novels is turns out to be that there are like artificial intelligences that very well could just hunt down every human and kill us all, right? So I mean, really a lovely vision of the future. And
I gotta go. I'll be right back. All right, keep going.
Okay, we're losing my co-host here for a minute.
No, keep going.
So I will just continue while Chris is taking a break. And I think so. Gary Zabel is a now retired philosophy professor from UMass Boston, and one of his areas of philosophy is about intelligence and artificial intelligence. And its many discontents. Although he's like myself, like very positive about what technology could do to improve, sort of human lives, humanity in general, depending on if it was run kind of in the interest of humanity. But as we're seeing today, there's a lot of big companies that are having a lot of money dumped on them for the moment, although they're not really making profits, and they're producing all kinds of products that nobody really asked for, like, oh, gee, can we have kill bots that will kill lots of people? Like, this isn't something
for 1 second
people really want.
Come back and you're talking about kill bots.
Yeah, well, we were already on the kill bot thing, but it is something that it's a kind of line of research that you do unfortunately see in the Boston area, because we're still a big tech hub. We're not the biggest tech hub, but
every one of these stories, I go through them, and it's the same story over and over, right? Just for
we're glad the tech doesn't really work in most cases, but it maybe will work someday, and probably we shouldn't be doing this stuff. So while Gary in that particular piece in 2018 was correct to criticize Boston Dynamics and other companies that are doing this kind of research, as also not being honest with the public and not demonstrating what is constantly demonstrated in journals that are researchers produce, that share the latest research that they're doing with each other, right? Where they're like, yeah, we're really not there yet. These things are definitely not autonomous and whatever. He's also questioning, like, why is this happening at all? Like, what are we doing this for? Like, and why would we want to develop a tech that could get out of control, or be just more likely with these technologies, including so-called AI right now, just run by people who don't have humanity's best interests at heart? they have
and
other weird interests. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, and everybody's, you take great umbrage with the term AI, right? The way it's used now, but because a lot of this
because it's
crap
not AI. That's
right,
why.
a lot of this crap we've seen, this computerization we've seen for years, right? This automation, and one thing I got to, I just want to shout out, and there's no way we could obviously talk about all the features, but in coming close to closing here, I want to say, like, I think that when we're talking about tech, since this is where the conversation's gone, facial recognition, our I wouldn't say relationship with it, but our coverage of it, our experience with our investigation, impugnment of facial recognition has been a centerpiece of BINJ. One of the stories that I wanted to start a nonprofit was called Boston Trolling. That was not a BINJ series, but that was also with Kenneth Flip and others, and that was about the Boston police using facial recognition software at Boston Calling without really anybody knowing. And that's a really long story there. And over the years, I got to say, props to ACLU, props to Digital Fourth. But on the reporting front, we're the ones who have kept people in the know about these things. There's been some others, Yahoo Miller, our friend currently with Flipside News and long time with the Bay State Banner covered surveillance. But really, Big Brother is one of those things where everybody acts like they hate it. People freak out when they see it in movies and stuff. But then when we tell you that this license plate, automatic license plate recognition software is in your neighborhood, or that the attorney general is, determining if the gang unit is using some of these technologies to investigate kids on the street, it's almost crickets. So, I think that all these stories kind of have the same resonance outside of BINJ. That people, maybe they didn't take them seriously, or they're too complicated to report, and that's what we've been here for. Spend months on them, cover and facial recognition over and over and over. Even last year, May 2024, Dan Atkinson reported how Massachusetts lawmakers are shopping for their own AI enhanced surveillance for the state house.
So, we've been producing these hard-hitting investigative stories for over 10 years. It's probably worth just quickly before we close, talk about the main, milestones, like the history of BINJ in very, very brief, terms. So the first period was one where Chris and our other partner, John Loftus, were working for Dig Boston. I became a columnist at Dig Boston like 2 months into BINJ, by September. And that column, I think, is on our binj.news site. The earliest stuff I wrote is up there. There's some stuff in the middle I don't have up there yet. But I ended up writing a column, which I still write periodically, like every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes every week, called Apparent Horizon. And it started back then. So we're basically all around Dig. But I was first working on unemployment. Then I was the first person to get a consistent stipend, not enough to live on by itself, but something. And then we managed to, by June 2023, and this may not seem like the thing we should do if we're trying to put BINJ on its feet properly, but it was, we managed to put together an investment group and acquire Dig Boston, a commercial alternative news weekly that we were all connected to by that point. In June 2023, we ended up owning it, right? And we owned it for over 7 years, and one of the big reasons we were doing that was, number one, so we could all have salaries right away, and we're all still doing BINJ at the same time. So our schedules weekly were crazy. They were definitely 60 to 80-hour weeks. I don't either, because none of us were like young. You guys are like, I think, 11 years younger than me, or no, more than that, 13 years younger than me or whatever. But still, we were, I was 47 when I started all this, and no, 48, I guess. Yeah. Well, by this time of year in 2015, I was 48. Let's put it that way. So, when I started originally, it was 47, and you all were like in your mid 30s, barely, I think, right around that time. So, you were on 35 or 6 or something like that, right? And because you're like 46 now.
Yeah, I think I just turned 46.
Yeah, there you go. So, we'd been around the block already, and we were, so by 2 years in, we took over Dig Boston about almost exactly 2 years after we started BINJ. And then we're doing both for 7 years. And things were really hard for both Dig and BINJ for the, I would say
Always?
2017 to 2019. Not exactly always. Early 2020, Dig was doing pretty well.
Yeah,
and BINJ was doing pretty well. And we're like, wow, this might actually work. Like, we were syndicating everything BINJ did to Dig, which between print and digital was about 80,000 circulation a week. So that was one big reason to have Dig, was to be able to syndicate everything we did, because no other publication ran everything we produced. And it was we were producing it in a major market in Boston proper, right? Other stuff we syndicate all over the state and still do, right? But not every piece runs in every one of the 20 publications.
No, and sometimes we don't know. I found out
so
today someone sent me a picture of a print publication that ran one of our last pieces. So,
well, we tell people, if they're community news outlets with budgets of under $2 million a year, which is most of them, whether they're commercial or whether they're nonprofit or even co-op, which is rare these days, always has been rare, they can go ahead and run it. They should let us know. We like to know. They don't always let us know. So then we get up to the pandemic hitting, and at that point, Dig's advertising went away, because you can't have advertising for public-facing institutions like universities and bars and restaurants when everything's locked down. And BINJ happened to have money at that moment, and we were able to lean on BINJ, and we were daily for like 3 months. Then we got some federal money and got Dig back on its feet again with a print operation. 2 more years go by almost. April 2022, the Omicron spike takes out Dig's print operation and its advertising, and therefore its budget again. Dig muddles through another year plus to June 2023 to take, to pay off some debts we had to pay off. And then we just ran out of juice with that. And it was only BINJ. Really, by 2022, it was only BINJ, but officially by June 2023, it was just BINJ again. And that's, we've been just BINJ ever since. In August 2023, we started the news outlet that became, now we call it binj.news. And so now we do like a magazine kind of weekly with feature reporting, which we started doing during the pandemic to help Dig and to help our operation. We started doing as BINJ, shorter form reporting. And we started to really grow what had been Dig's internship program and is now BINJ's internship program. Like currently we have, as you know, 17, as well Chris knows, 17 interns like right now. And I'm already interviewing spring interns, we have the interns producing the shorter pieces. Some of our pros also do that. But Chris all along has been through all of this, has been mostly the one quarterbacking the big pieces that were the reason we got this whole thing started to begin with.
The fun part. So
that's the very quick.
That's it. All right, I gotta wrap, but dude, that's okay. Where we are. I gotta edit. I gotta do some stuff. I gotta put the kid to bed. But
no, word. We were gonna go a half an hour. We went 42 minutes.
It's cool. All good. No, this is. But I'm gonna cut this up. Get some of those old clips out there. We do have the best of BINJ for anybody watching. A bunch of them. In fact, a couple more, which I'm still gonna put up. I think I have 3 more, which we never put up last year. We should do it now.
Yeah, we totally should. And
there's the Genesis story. We've told it many times. We're good at it at this point.
We told parts of it, and we told parts of it tonight. There's always more. There's a lot more, but
someone
get a book someday.
We were, that was a big part of being a nonprofit. We actually wrote about this happening, like as it was going.
Yeah,
a lot of it's still out there,
I've written a great deal, and so have you, about this stuff, about just what it's like to do what we're doing in this era. That how difficult it is, why we bother, why we go through this. Why we, do everything we do for very little pay to this day. This was never, a big money thing, and it remains that way. But I mean, at this point, here we are. It looks like we're going to make it to year 11. And, we're in a fundraiser right now, of course. We'll be talking more about that in the weeks to come. We'll be back next Tuesday. This week we're on Wednesday because we had the holiday yesterday. Kind of unusual to have a Tuesday holiday, but we did. So we're here now. Next week it'll be Tuesday. The 10th edition. We'll be interviewing somebody. We haven't decided who yet.
Maybe Nate. Maybe we'll get Nate Homan on there for his new piece.
Yeah.
I'm gonna work on tonight. All right.
You all will enjoy that. All right. So we'll talk to you soon, folks. And thanks for joining us. Peace.
Happy 10th.
And I need to find out there it is. There's the button.